All right, it is 3 o'clock Eastern time, so we're going to get started. Really excited to be here with you all. This is great. My name is Matt Emhoff. I'm a spiritual and life coach, as well as the director of Deeper Ministry. And what we do is train you in the art of living free. And of course, a part of living free is getting out of the prisons and the chains and the things that have held us back in the past. And sometimes we're still dealing with them. And one of those things is our emotions. And we have emotional defense mechanisms that we've had and that we've learned, and we're trying to figure out what that looks like and what the story of our emotions is and what that has been, and how those things have affected us. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. I'm really excited because today joining me is my good friend Mark Fryer. Mark, how you doing today?
Doing well, thank you. Good to be here.
Awesome. So Mark is a very close friend of mine. He's been a mentor. He is an executive coach and personal coach, and him and I have journeyed a long ways together. And he was actually one of the first people to kind of confront some of the emotions in my life and ask me questions about that. And I was a part of some teachings he did years and years ago that started me going, wait, wow, there's something going on here. There's something different that he's saying that I've experienced in my life and that kind of thing. So he's been there for that whole thing, and I'm really excited to have him here today. And Mark and I, a lot of what we do is when we spend time together, we just enjoy conversation and going deeper, pushing into subjects and different things, ideas, and asking questions of each other, and that kind of thing. So today, what we want to do is kind of invite you into our conversation, um, on the story of emotions and what that looks like. I was just remembering, Mark, probably a year and a half ago now, we were out at Thompson Lake, which is a lake near Mark's house. We had our folding chairs out there, and a cigar and a beverage, and just kind of relaxing and talking about all kinds of things. And I just had this kind of nudge come over me, and I said, Mark, you've helped me so much. You've helped so many other people, and I want to help you get your message out. I want to help other people experience that same thing. And Mark got this little grin on his face, and his response was, "Well, it's kind of funny you say that because I just wrote my book." And I was like, "What? I didn't even know that you were writing a book. What's going on? And when did you write a book?" And in the past 5 or 6 weeks, I wrote my book. And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" Um, so anyways, it was just kind of funny because he did it, undercover, and nobody knew it. But all of a sudden, he had written this book, and it's a book kind of about his story and some of the things he's learned and wants to share. And so it's called The Choice to Show Up. And I would definitely recommend putting that on the top of your reading list. You can get it at Amazon.com or thechoicetoshowup.com. But Mark, could you give like a 30-second on what the book's about?
Sure. Um, Number one, it was an effort for me to say everybody is worth the dignity of their story. And it's something that I believe for many years. I've taught it, I've shared it. And the more I share my story and the more vulnerable I get, the more I find that other people are vulnerable and share their story, which just draws us in this deeper and deeper connection. And I realized that it was my cue of sharing my story that caused others to be vulnerable. So people had asked me that, hey, Mark, when are you going to write your story? And I've shared it verbally, but never really written it. So it was the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. And what I love about you, the book, is that you tell your story, and so we can all connect to your story, but also have some really practical things that we can try out in our own lives and that kind of thing. So anyways, check that book out. But I wanted to refer to that book to give you a little background on who Mark is and what he's been up to as well. Um, and so again, we want to invite you into that kind of conversation that we have together. Um, and so as we go, we invite you to ask questions in the chat box here on Zoom. Just do a public question that we can see, and we'll respond to it live as much as we can. and kind of talk about it as we go. And so as we start here, what I want to ask all of us to do, every one of us, is to ask this question of ourselves. And we're just going to kind of take 30 seconds to think about it. If you got something to write with, write it down. And the question is, um, what did you learn about emotion from your childhood? Okay, so let's just pause for a second. We don't have to go real deep, but for 30 seconds, let's just think about that. What did you learn about emotion from your childhood? All right, as you're kind of finishing up, I know that's not enough time at all, but it may be something to go back to later. Invite God into, think about, process more. But I want to do that just to kind of get your own story, your own heart, and your narrative connected to ours, and what we're talking about today. So. Because it does impact us, right? Our childhood, our parents or caretakers, victories or failures, our story matters, and it impacts our beliefs and our behaviors and our emotions today, right? Um, so, as a way to kind of enter into our topic today, Mark and I often do what we call a story day together. Sometimes we do them individually, but a lot of times we work together with a client, either Mark's client or my client. And if you can imagine, kind of using the language that Mark said, it's having the dignity for somebody to hear your whole story. Only you have lived it, and we don't often get to do that. We may get to share a 10-minute blurb about who we are, that kind of thing, but really, where have I been? What does it all mean? What has impacted me? What are my wounds and my brokenness? And really honoring it all, and walking through some healing and understanding, getting some understanding of a path of transformation in your story, and also finding the real gold, the beauty, the creativity, the power, the strength, the glory that is also hidden in your story. And so we do that. That's a full day. That's a face-to-face thing. We've done that, I don't know, probably with 20 or 30 people now. And every time we ask the question, that same question we just asked you, right? So if we ask the question of our stories, what did we learn from childhood about emotions? And I think, and Mark, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's about 100% of people have said something about something negative, something about, everything from, it just wasn't talked about at all. So we're kind of left on our own to figure that out. I guess it's something we don't talk about. I guess it's something that we're that's not safe, that's off limits, or that kind of thing, all the way, everything from there all the way to it's never talk about emotion, never, you're not supposed to cry, or don't ever be sad, or don't ever be fearful, or those types of things. Just shut it down, either verbally or the nonverbal communications too, just by behavior and that kind of thing. So we talk about that in the story day, and we've just seen this over and over again. There's some kind of negative reaction. So to start out, the question is, why do we, as seemingly as a culture, have such a deficit when it comes to emotions? What do you think, Mark?
Well, thanks for asking, Matt. You've journeyed with me long enough to know that when either one of us asks the why question, our faces light up and the neurons in our brain kick, and we go, yeah, let's get to the real core. And so, if you permit me, and you can certainly interrupt, I want to nerd out for just a few minutes here on kind of the history of emotions. If you hang around me long enough, you'll often hear me say, while there are a lot of challenges in this time in history, not just the pandemic, but in our history, we also live in an amazing time when neurobiology and brain research are now introducing us to the science of emotions. Maybe you haven't heard that term before, but we're really introduced now to the science of emotions. What do we know? Emotions are data. It's just simply information. Okay. We know that emotions can be both confusing and addictive, and yet one of the most important states in our life. And the other thing we know is that can run on the continuum from quite frankly, crushingly negative to euphorically positive. And so that is kind of what emotions are. We're going to dig in deeper, but that's a good start. And why is it so important to talk about the science of emotions? For thousands of years, human beings have really tried to ignore emotions. You talk about even the history of America, where we live in a country that's about individual effort, success, where we're highly rewarded for all the things that we do. And then you add to the fact that many of us grew up with a certain culture, Irish, German, Black, Hispanic, Native Indian, whatever. I know I grew up in a German culture, which meant emotions weren't honored. You just didn't deal with them. You sucked it up and you move forward. And so I am experiencing this whole emotional life and the science of emotions, quite frankly, in real time. Not having it as a childhood, which we'll talk about later, and then kind of now being in the middle of this. The science of emotions was actually introduced in 1990. And then later in 1990, Daniel Goleman started talking about emotional intelligence. He was out of Harvard. And then more people started writing about emotional intelligence, and it became kind of the norm, but it was so different. And people initially were like, I don't know. To say they were skeptical would be an understatement. There's just no such thing as that. And so all these forward thinkers like Mark Singelman and so forth were just considered almost quacks at some level. And so integrating them into our life and learning the skill is really important. And they found out that learning them in community is really important. Now, all that being said, again, I said it was a brief nerd history, okay, is today, this is where we're at. So, Dr. Mark Brackett, the name you may or may know, doesn't matter, is a research psychologist, and he's the founding director of the Yale University for Emotional Intelligence. So now in the Ivy Leagues, we are now having foundations and courses and learning and PhDs in emotional intelligence. He's the professor of Child Study Center at Yale, and he just wrote the book called Permission to Permission to Feel, which is interesting. Why would you write a book, Permission to Feel? Well, apparently we have a long way to go. We have a long way to go in learning what it means and what it looks like. So here are some truths that I would propose why we as a culture have a problem with it. The truth is, none of us had much schooling on it. So therefore, we don't know a lot about emotions. The second thing, if you were raised by depression parents, which mine were, or you're raised by baby boomers, which you were, or even some of the Gen Xers, which some of the kids are today, we had parents with no emotional education or very little. And that's not a cut against my mom and dad or me, because I didn't have it either. It's just there was so little emotional education. Also, teachers had no emotional education and learning. And so why this is so important is because what's at stake is, our ability to thrive and our ability to teach the next generation how to cope and how to live in a way that's going to lead them to be a healthy place. And so I think we've learned, hopefully, or we're learning that bottling up emotions just doesn't work. It doesn't work at home. It doesn't work in sports. It doesn't work in politics. It doesn't work in life. And therefore, here's the bottom line. We either own our emotions or they own us. Now, that's the brief nerdy history, but that's why I think it's important we talk about it.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mark. I definitely agree. It reminded me of my wife and I just watched the new Tom Hanks movie about Fred Rogers, right? A beautiful day in the neighborhood, and that was in the 80s and early 90s, and that he was doing his TV show, but it was just such an outlier for somebody to be talking about emotions and to talk to kids about things like death or divorce, or to push into subjects like that. So you could kind of see what you're talking about, where there's just like people here and there started to talk about it, and now more and more it's like it's gaining momentum. And even in my son's first grade class, every day they do a check-in in the morning, and it's colors, of emotion, where they're saying, hey, how do you feel? Well, I feel orange because I feel sad, or I feel, green, I think, which is happy, or, those types of things. Yeah. And so they're getting that emotional education, even at school, where there was nothing like that, for me. There was nothing like that for you.
No,
especially in that
system.
Absolutely.
That's really good to hear. I like
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Um, but the other reason I think why our culture has such a deficit when it comes to emotions is it starts with the idea of pain, because,
Hmm.
and in a broad definition, right? There's discomfort, there's embarrassment, there's excruciating emotional pain. There's all kinds of things, um, but in our culture, that's a first world, fairly affluent culture, we get to avoid pain quite a bit. If I have a headache, I reach for the ibuprofen. If I'm hungry, I don't
Yeah,
have to feel that hunger because I reach for the pantry
that's
or
great.
the store, go to the store to get something. And quite frankly, that's why part of the reason why this pandemic that we're all in right now is it rattles us so much, because the things we are so used to and kind of take it for granted are being somewhat taken away. When we look at the grocery store shelves and there's no toilet paper or no bread or things like that, which we can still find it, and we're doing okay,
Mhm.
we're okay, but there's something in us that goes, hey, wait a second, what's going on? um, because we have gotten to avoid the pain of having to go without, um, and and that kind of thing. So in general, we've learned, I can figure out a way to avoid pain. And what
Mhm.
healthy emotional living says is, no, we have to go right into the pain. It's not avoiding the pain; it's accepting the pain and living the pain, and doing what the emotions are trying to get us to see and understand and go after, and find the healing is through, not around the pain.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
We have a long way to go when a psychologist says, and she did, Susan David, discomfort is the price of admission to a meaningful life. And everybody goes, wow. Like, no, this has been this way throughout history. And we're like discovering that maybe discomfort is the path, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, we have a long way to go.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And so, um, it kind of comes out in a word that we don't often like to say, but it's really entitlement. We feel
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
entitled not to have to feel the discomfort of what's going on. But as you've said, as I've said in other places, it leaks, no matter what. It leaks, and our anxiety, our fear, our anger, our sadness, even the joy that we sometimes repress or hold on to too tightly, it leaks, and it comes out in negative ways that can harm us or other people. Um, and so it actually, as we're kind of talking about, also the way that Jesus lived his emotions in this time, in this webinar as well, it reminds me of the rich young ruler, the story of
Yeah.
the rich young ruler, where the guy meets with Jesus on the rooftop at night, which I can only assume he's kind of like looking around like, man, I hope nobody sees me meeting with this rabbi guy. And he's like, okay, Jesus, I'm doing pretty well. I've got it all taken care of. I do all the commandments. I give away some of my stuff. I tithe. I keep the rules basically. And he's like, am I in? Am I in? Am I doing okay? And Jesus is just so awesome in this. He just kind of says, you know what, you're doing well. But there's one thing, and I don't think there's anything magic about the one thing with this
Mm.
guy, but
Yeah.
I think Jesus sees it in each one of us, our sacred cow, the thing we're not willing to give up, the thing, the pain that we're not willing to go into because we'll avoid at all costs. And he says, look, you gotta give away all that you have, because that's the thing. That's the thing that's keeping you from me. That's the thing that's keeping you from thriving. And it says the guy walked away sad because he knew that's the thing he wasn't going to let go of. And I love, as kind of a side note, but I love Jesus was so okay with himself. He didn't say, wait, come back. Let's renegotiate. Let me tell you something easier to hear, or, that kind of thing. He just goes, okay. Jesus just offered what he had to offer, and then people could receive it or not. But I think as an analogy, it's a great picture of kind of our American, kind of way that we feel entitled to not have to feel discomfort or pain, and we'll do anything to get around it. We kind of go to Jesus to say, hey, let's find let's find the loophole. Let's find the way that we don't have to deal with this. And even our prayers betray that sometimes of, hey, God, get me out of this situation. And often I think his response is, no, we've got to go through the situation.
Mm-hmm.
So when we live in that space, I think it creates a deficiency in our emotions. It creates space to say, I don't want to go there, therefore I'm not going to learn an emotionally healthy vocabulary. I'm not going to learn how to do that. I'm going to spend more energy trying to avoid than enter it.
Yeah, it's good. It's good.
The other one that it reminds me of is Psalm 23, where David, goes through the whole thing, and he gets to the part where he says, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, because God takes me out of the valley and puts me up on the mountaintop with the sunshine, where everything is nice and great. That's what we want it to say, but of course it doesn't say that. It says, I'm okay because you're with me in the valley, in the shadow, in what feels like death, and to be in it requires emotional health and understanding, and to face off. And it's not a fun thing. It's not a very popular thing. And I think that's why some people didn't follow Jesus, because he was on his way to confronting pain and being in it versus avoiding, which we like to do. So I think that's one, among other things, reason why we have such a deficit when it comes to emotions.
Good. Patrick asked some really good questions. I think we're going to get that a little bit later, and that is, how do you kind of help people walk through some of the grief that they're having right now? So hang on to that, and we'll get to that question. Okay.
Yeah.
That's good.
That's good. So any other thoughts on that, Mark? Why do you think there's a deficit in our culture? Emotional health, emotional vocabulary, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think, that to me, really puts it in a nutshell, and there's so many things that are rewarded that are not emotional. I know that in his book, Dr. Brackett says that a student will come into Yale and say, I didn't need emotional intelligence to get into Yale. I'm just smart. And his response to them is, right, but you'll need it to graduate and succeed, because nobody wants an entitled Ivy Leaguer who can't get along, who is not emotionally intelligent, who's entitled and thinks that the world owes them a favor. So I think it's just a great example that sums up everything we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's really good. When you get rewarded for, things other than emotional health, or even sometimes the opposite of it, it's hard to see the value in it,
Now, just a full disclosure, there's a part of me that kind of likes it when I run across clients who are not emotionally healthy, because I get those phone calls to say, hey, Mark, can you help these people who are really smart, but they're not emotionally healthy? Sure.
Yeah.
And so I'm there.
Yeah, which then can balance out for them, for all of us. They're smart, we're smart, but then we can also have this emotional intelligence that
absolutely
makes us, enables us to empathize and connect and love well, and interact and communicate, and those types of things. So that makes a lot of sense.
Which is why I keep going back to the foundational principles of what I work on, which is transformational leadership or transformational living, both from the head and the heart. Both are important, and it's critical. So
yeah. So as we talk about this, I want to get more specific to say, kind of looking at the Christian culture, or in church, or places we've learned about God and Jesus and that kind of thing. There seems to be an emotional deficit there as well, and yeah, I mean, I think that's something to unpack a little bit. So
it really is. Yeah. This is one of those, I'm like a wind-up doll on this topic, because, what gives me the credibility to talk about this? So I'm a pastor's kid. I went to parochial schools my whole life, and I was a pastor for 22 years. So I think I have some amount of understanding of the Christian culture and what it has done to help shape. And let me just start out with a broad, beautiful exclamation of what the church, and I mean people now, okay, those who follow Jesus, which the church gets to do. And that is, we get to proclaim the good news. We get to live the good news, be the good news, proclaim the good news, walk in the good news. And that is, we are completely and utterly, ruthlessly loved by God. And I think, that is critical as we start here. And so over time, we know that's the message of the kingdom. We understand that. and even local congregations and say, yeah, we preach the good news. So I want to start there, okay? But here's what happens then in what I will call congregational life, for lack of a better word. So I want you to carry that with the reality of humans and congregational life. So far, so good. And a little bit kind of goes back into what I understand, my best shot at understanding the history of this, because again, I was part of it. I learned it in real time. So in 2002, John Ortberg comes out with a book called The Life You've Always Wanted. And in it, he talks about a guy named Cranky Hank. Cranky Hank. Cranky Hank was a typical church member. He was focused on bad news. He rarely affirmed people. He complained all the time. Ortberg called him his native language was complaint. He was joyless. He was irritable. He had little use for outcasts. He was racist. He was cranky when he was young. He was cranky when he was middle-aged. And he was cranky when he was older. And then Ortberg said something. Again, 2002, he said, and the problem was nobody was surprised by his actions. Nobody was surprised that this guy could go to church every Sunday, hear the good news, and just be such a cranky Hank. And I think that's telltale, right? Because I grew up with those people, and the cranky Hanks were in my church, and I knew them, and I played softball with them, and I get all that. So I understood what Ortberg was talking about. I had no idea how to work on it, but he started talking about emotions in a way that were so different than I'd ever heard. Fast forward, so I went to a lot of seminars, read a lot, and did a lot of study in the Christian culture, and realized that we had a lot to learn in the Christian culture. And then Peter Cesaro comes out in 2009, really before that, but I was introduced to it in 2009 with the book, The Emotionally Healthy Church. And his whole premise is you cannot separate spiritual life from emotional life. You just can't do it. And I heard that, I'm like, what are you talking about? How can that be? And for the vast majority of the Christian culture, emotions and spiritual life, they're not on the same paths at all. And therefore what happened is that you were rewarded for being spiritually wise, spiritually smart, having biblical knowledge, getting quizzes on all your Bible stuff that were A's, but yet emotions were never really honored. And so I began to take a look at that and say, why, what happened? What happened to the good news and the missing of this? And here's I would propose three things. There's so many more, but let me just offer you three things to think about from the Christian culture. I actually asked a seminary professor once, why don't we talk more about emotions in the kingdom of God? And he said, are you ready? And I said, yeah. He said, they're not testable. This is a seminary professor. He said, they're not testable. It's too mushy. It's too, it's not black and white enough. And therefore, we're going to hang with things that we know. We can test about theological words, and we can't test on things like emotions. So we're just going to keep them separate. I'm like, oh, got it. So the academic professors were training church leaders to keep those separate. Okay. Number two, and again, this just happens because of humanity. There was another school of thought, which you grew up with, and I know I've talked to other people that you know and I know, which is emotions were sinful. Or in my case, they're secondary, tertiary at best, and that what matters more is biblical knowledge. And I remember, so that's what I grew up with. And therefore, to deny emotions meant you were being spiritual. To deny them meant you were being spiritual. And so that was kind of the reward for everybody. Well, that guy doesn't get so angry. He got over grief pretty quickly. I remember, people, I conducted over 150 funerals, and people would say to me, well, are they done grieving yet? I'm like, what? So there was this expectation. You just work through this very quickly and we're on. Why is she so sad? He should be happier. He shouldn't be so frustrated. And so that was kind of the labeling system. And then what happened is we tried to then figure out how to bring God to the equation when we were emotionally illiterate. And I'm going to just use that word because I'm one of them, emotionally illiterate. So people would come to me and say, hey, Mark, I'm going to a funeral tomorrow. What do I say to the family members of the person who died? Like, you have a Bible passage for me? And I'm like, and I understand why they want to give a Bible passage. God is victorious. God is strong. Those Bible passages are really good. I find great comfort in them. But I think what happens over time is we tend to think if I give someone a passage, then I now don't have to deal with the pain. And so I would often say to them, well, why don't you just go and love them? Why don't you just stand with them, cry with them, sit with them, hug them, tell stories about the person who, and they looked at me like I was from Mars. Like, well, can't we just give them a Bible passage and move on? Like, not helpful. Bible passage is great, not always helpful without the context of connection, right? And then on the other hand, too, I've seen this, and please hear me correctly, and this could probably be up for debate, is we tend then also to look at spiritual warfare and overemphasize it. I mean, I believe in spiritual warfare, but when you overemphasize it and now say, well, everything's an attack, then what happens is that I can assume a victim mentality, and then I don't have to be responsible for my emotions. I don't have to be responsible for my sadness, my frustration, my anger, the way I'm edgy, the way I come across, the way I leak to other people. And so this overemphasis of one or the other tends to happen. And then you can unpack these. Let me get to the last one and then we'll go back. Um, the third thing is, and I know this because I was one of them, as the leader goes, so goes the congregation. And I was never, and I'm not overemphasizing, never taught by a leader to be emotionally mature. Never were they held up as important. Never did I hear a courageous leader say, I'm struggling with anger. Here's how I'm managing my emotions. And so Peter Cesaro, when he wrote, and I have it right here, ignoring emotions is turning our back on reality. And reality is where we meet God. I'm thinking, whoa, I have a lot to learn. So my journey has been literally it's been decades of trying to figure this out, and it was changing a lot, and that goes back into my story. But that's what I experienced in the church growing up, and what I noticed. So
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mark. Yeah, like a wind-up doll.
I know, sorry.
Go. No, that's awesome. One of the things that jumps out at me as you talked through that is a lot of it has to do with our broader culture that influences our Christian culture, that really worships knowledge and intellect. And I think a myth that we need to debunk is that we think knowledge equals transformation.
Yeah.
If I know it, then my life changes. And it's just not true. We can know, a Bible verse, or we can know a good idea or concept or that kind of thing. But like Cranky Hank, it doesn't change us. Nothing actually happens, which, by the way, is a lot more comfortable because I can avoid pain by staying in my head, thinking about it. Oh, that's a nice sermon. I'm glad I learned that. Now I can move on. And so what I do and what you do, what we do in our coaching is taking information and making it into transformation, which is a lot of hard work.
Oh, man.
Especially for the client, the person that's actually doing it. And we have to do it in our own lives as well. That says, now let's try it out. Now let's try to get it into our everyday lives. Now are there things in the way that we have to surrender and let go of to make room for X, Y, and Z, those types of things, which is getting into our internal world, which is getting into our emotional world, which is getting into some of our sacred cows that we don't want to let go of. And so it's not popular to try to change. By definition, it pushes the boundaries of our comfort zone. Therefore, it's uncomfortable.
Yes, it is.
So who's out there going, let's be uncomfortable? Nobody's excited about that. And yet, as you've just said, and as we know, that's the way to true healing. That's the way to become the person that God really created us to be, is through the discomfort of healing and letting go what we need to let go of, and trying to put new patterns and rhythms in our lives that because we have old patterns and rhythms that sometimes are unhelpful or just taking up space. So, all kinds of different things, but it requires, traveling from our head to our heart. It doesn't mean, there's no reason, there's no place for the intellect. That's a huge help. It creates a container and an understanding for us to then go into our heart, our emotions, our intuition, things like that, to learn in different ways, to know in different ways, And so when we talk about, scripture and those kind of things, we offer a verse, there's layer one of, here's the knowledge. And then there's layer 2 of how do I connect my story with that verse? How am I actually trying to practice that? If we want to talk about the peace that passes all understanding, okay, how am I actually trying to live that way and being peace that passes all understanding to other people and all that kind of stuff? And what's in the way of me? Now all of a sudden it just got a lot more complicated, and I don't know if I want to do all that work. I'd much rather say it and feel good about it and move on, right?
Yeah.
But as I'm saying this, I want to get to Patrick's question.
Yeah, please.
As we can, all kind of read it, but it's really about empathy and how to love people well as they're experiencing loss and grief of things that we've had to let go of, particularly in this time of this pandemic. Things that we thought were going to happen are not happening anymore. Things that were happening are not, and that's a grieving, that's a having to let go of. And what I love about the question is he even uses the balance in there. So we want to have this balance of empathy and care and all that. And I think that's the real practice of learning how to be emotionally healthy enough to be a good sounding board, to be able to have space and not need to fix it, not need to figure it out. We don't always need somebody to say, now I know the answer. We just need somebody to give us a hug or just say, hey, I can listen. I can, without having to get anything from it. For myself, I can just be honest and open. And then the balance between that and, not wallowing in it or staying in it or getting stuck there is really helpful. So the key is the idea of the balance between the two. But I love the word empathy because what empathy says is I know what it feels like to lose something. I know what it feels like to have to grieve. I may not know exactly what my teenage daughters are going through or for that situation, but in my life there's things I've lost. So we access that emotion that way to say, man, that makes me feel sad or a little angry, and that kind of thing. And then we can leak in good ways those emotions of saying, hey, I get it, I'm in it with you, we'll get through this together, that kind of thing. And then the balance of not just carrying that around with us and wallowing in it and that kind of thing is to release the emotion. So if I'm helping somebody else and I do this, you do this in our coaching, and somebody is saying, hey, I'm struggling with this, and we use empathy and connection, all that kind of stuff. When I walk away, every time I can remember to, at least I do it quite a bit, is I release that. That is not mine to carry now. I love them, and I'm in it with them, but I'm not going to keep feeling the pain of it because it's not mine to carry after I'm done talking to them, or those types of things. And then eventually, for them not to keep carrying it, you may have to encourage them to see, after you've given space, to empathize and let them talk about it and do their crappy first draft and all that, to say, now, can you see any good in this? What are you learning from this? Don't start with that because that hasn't honored the emotion that they've been in, but get to that. And I think what I feel like is you can start with a Bible verse, or you can start with scripture, or, hey, I heard this sermon, or that kind of thing. But if you don't get to the real emotion of I'm connecting with this person, and I think that's what Jesus did so well. And we could go through tons of examples of the woman at the well, or Zacchaeus, or others, where he went to where they were at. He went into their house. He went into their town. They went into their emotional space and said, hey, I'm here, and I've got something to offer, and you can take it, or you don't have to. But I'm here to love. I'm here to care for you. I'm here to enter in.
It's really good. And I think that's the key. So, interesting, the word compassion comes from the Latin word, two Latin words, cum and passion. Cum is with, and passion is suffer. Mm-hmm. So I know Patrick, he's a friend of ours. He's suffering with his daughter's loss. Now, how do you do that? And you said it, through empathy, through listening, through caring, through connecting. And so we can choose how to be compassionate in different ways, which I think is really cool. And I love the idea of just being able to be with them. And, when Galatians says bear with one another their burdens, he doesn't say take them. it's like, I'll walk with you, let's kind of walk along the road. I'll help you carry the burden for a while. I'm not going to take it, but I'm going to help carry it. And so I think that's good word, Matt.
Yeah. How about this next question from
Yeah,
John? Do you see that, Mark?
I did. It's interesting. I was thinking about emotional sobriety, and I think it makes sense to me because when you're an alcoholic or when you're using any addictive behavior, food, work, power, whatever it is, to be not clear minded, you're losing your touch with reality, right? We're trying to numb the pain. And so I like the term emotional sobriety because it's saying, are you present? I'm emotionally here. And therefore I think it does fit the transformational journey, right? To be emotionally aware, to be emotionally here. So I like that.
Yeah, I like that too. The emotionally sober,
Mhm.
clear-minded, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's really good. The other thing I want to say is in the idea of kind of our Christian culture is I think that the place that Mark and I and others like us are coming from is that we love the church and people in the church. We want to help. We want to bring goodness. It's just there are things that are sometimes stopping it. Sometimes
Yeah.
we have to unlearn before we can then learn. And so there is this deficit of emotional understanding and health and that kind of thing. But it's not in every person or every church or whatever. But it is a broadly understood thing. And so what we want to do is be a part of those who are bringing emotional health to the church and more importantly the people
Yep.
and kingdom people, and saying, hey, this is a part of healing. This is a part of growth, transformation, becoming the person you were created to be. And so if we can get to the root of it and the core of it, then we can have this kind of conversation and just the honesty of it, right? And it starts with vulnerability to say, yeah, I guess there are some places where I've been pretty vulnerably lost or didn't have that education or and that kind of thing. And again, it starts with our story. So to be okay with some of those limitations, to be okay with wherever you're at, that's okay because you're loved right there. That's the good news. You're already loved. So since you're loved, now we can get healing. We can get more understanding. We can continue on that journey.
Yeah,
Right?
you got it. I agree. And one of the guys that you and I have worked with on Story Day, and I don't think you'll mind us saying that, is Trevor. He just commented here that he just got a text literally from a close friend whose dad is dying of cancer in the next 24 to 48 hours.
Mm.
And so Trevor had told me that was happening. But what I find interesting is his what he shared with him in the chat. He said, "Hey, friend, this literally sucks. One thing that we weren't taught growing up is that it is okay to be emotional. It's okay to cry. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to not know what to do. You don't have to be the tough guy anymore." And then and this is where the passage is just beautiful. Be still and know that I am God and I'm in control.
Yeah.
And that's a beautiful mix, I think, of the balance of saying, here's the resounding power of Scripture and what David learned in the Old Testament to the reality of life. This sucks. And we can be still and know that God is God and in our control. So,
Right.
great example of what we're talking about.
Yeah. Well, and I think it brings it to life. It gives it
Yeah.
personality. It gives it a reality that Jesus is a person that's saying, I love you. I want to interact with you. Versus, a historical book with some nice words in it.
Yeah.
It brings it to life. The living, breathing Word of God, when we live it out, when we add into it the humanity of emotions, just like Jesus would do. And I am so sorry, Trevor, because this also, I understand you're carrying with, as we just said, that empathy and that love and care in with your friend. And I love that you're aware enough to do that. And what a gift, because if that person receives that from you, then they will be able to move through this time in a healthier space for themselves, to release things, to not hold on to it, to not stay stuck in resentment, or I don't know the story, of course, but there's always all kinds of things. So what a beautiful gift. Way to go, man. I love that.
Yeah, no kidding. And then Nate just said something too that, sometimes what happens is people misinterpret your emotions due to previous relationships. And so, how do you respond to emotions when they're read wrongly? I'm reminded of a person I knew who really got frustrated every time she cried. And so when her kids would be with her, they would say, "Mom, quit crying." And it wasn't she was crying because she was always sad. She was crying because she was happy. She was a very emotionally aware, beautifully wired person. And so she actually had to sit down with the kids and say, "Listen, at the end of the day, I'm going to cry. And you're not making me cry. This event is stirring in me emotions. It's stirring in me happiness or sometimes sadness or sometimes whatever." And so it's hard conversation, but it's important conversation to say, this is what I'm feeling right now.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important way to talk to people because they don't know. You'll often watch someone get interviewed or all of a sudden an emotion come up and they'll turn their face or I don't want you to see me cry. Well, what is it? Are you sad? Are you happy? Are you embarrassed? Are you thrilled? And so it's sometimes having those conversations with people that are close to us to let them know what's going on.
Yeah. No, that's good. And I love your question, Nate. And one of the things I've run into in my life and in helping others through coaching is when we transform, when we experience healing and growth, often people still think they're interacting with the person that was a year ago
Yes.
or 5 years ago. And it's really hard because you've changed, but maybe they don't
Correct.
know that yet, or they're still trying to learn the new you, the new parts of you that,
Yeah.
well, you've done this your whole life. So of course you're going to react that way again. And so in a sense, we have to give other people grace, just like we give ourselves grace, because we know, at least to some degree, I've grown a lot in the past year. Um, but other people sometimes don't see it, especially if they're experiencing some of their own pain in response to, like you said, improper responses emotionally or whatever those things are. We get stuck then in the past, in what has happened in the past, and I'm still fighting that. Where some of us have moved into a new place that says, "Hey, I don't respond that way anymore. Or when I do,
Right.
it's for a different reason." And so we have to give some grace to people, and then also, as Mark just said, have some of those conversations where we help other people interpret emotions because they may not know their own emotional education, or have the vocabulary for it or whatever, to say, "Hey, just so you know, when I'm crying, this is what that's about, and I'm okay with that." That takes
Yeah,
a lot of
absolutely.
vulnerability.
It really does. This is true for my life. So my kids are your age, Matt, or right around that. You're
Mhm.
millennials, and they experienced when I was emotionally unhealthy as a kids growing up, that my passion would also be intense and often angry. Okay. And so today, which by the way, I'm grateful they call me Rafiki more than another name that they used to call me. Um, they'll say, "Dad, don't get angry." I'm like, "Well, wait, 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 wait. This intensity is not anger. Okay. You know what anger looks like and felt like. This intensity is passion. This intensity is because I'm excited. Intensity is because I have a strong opinion." So it's an ongoing discussion, especially with people you love, to be able to kind of name what we're feeling and what's really going on at that point.
Yeah. And a huge help in that is to name intent,
Ooh, yeah.
right? What my intent is, because they're receiving something that, it's never 100%. It's like playing the telephone game. You whisper in somebody's ear, and by the end, it's a completely different, different message by the time it gets to the end, because we all hear something different. So to describe intent, if it's true,
Yeah,
my
right.
intent is that I'm passionate versus I'm angry. That's a huge deal. That helps me know the why. And
Mhm.
so I can now respond accordingly versus respond not, assuming intent because of the past, or because of
Mhm.
my past, or I'm triggered by something, or that kind of thing. So that can be really helpful too. Um,
Mhm.
I love that. Trevor, if you saw it in the chat box there, he said,
Oh
"No,
yeah, yeah,
the guy responded, no tough guy here. Waterworks galore."
yeah.
Oh,
Way to
that's really
go.
good. I love that you're walking through that with him, Trevor. To have somebody with you in it, that's huge. Hmm. Patrick says, can you say more about the importance of naming the emotions we are feeling and experiencing?
Mm. Yeah. So part of what I mentioned before is our lack of education around them, meaning that we don't know what they are. And what I had to learn is I had to go back to the beginning, like a kindergarten, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
of emotions. And so one of the things that my therapist said to me many years ago was, Mark, you have no effective emotional vocabulary. I'm like, but I know Greek and Hebrew, and I can preach a good sermon, and I can teach a Bible class. And she's like, well, that's really well and good, but you have no effective emotional vocabulary. And so she handed me something called the feeling wheel, which was really embarrassing because it was so elementary, like happy, sad, glad, mad, and then came out from other feelings. But I had to start there because I had no idea. And so, which also included intent, right? And so it was about really being able to learn an effective emotional vocabulary it's what's Nolan doing now. He's got it today. Which, by the way, very intriguing. So, Dr. Mark Brackett has what's called a mood app, and I know a number of schools are using this. And it looks something like this, where the kids walk in the classroom and they have to mark where they are: high energy, unpleasant; high energy, pleasant; low energy, unpleasant; low energy, pleasant. And then it's recorded for the teacher on the screen, so she sees where the kids are emotionally. And his whole point is teachers need to be aware of this because it's affecting the way they learn. Completely will affect the way they learn on any given day. And we know where kids are all over the place, especially middle school and high school kids, right? So it's really beginning to say, I need to learn an effective emotional vocabulary. Now, understand, I get my share of mocking around this with my family. Oh, Dad, you gonna pull out the feeling wheel? Yeah, I am. All right. Or, I have grandkids now. Dad, you pull out the feeling wheel on Abby? Yeah, we are. And I, in turn, quite frankly, they're better at it than I ever was. Oh, I'm mad right now. I'm happy right now. You know, and so it's really begin to say, is it? I guess it's an intent. Do I want to begin to learn more about my emotions so that I can label them and integrate them? And the more I do that, the healthier I will be.
Yeah. No, that's so good. And, I mean, even Jesus did that, in the Bible.
Yeah.
He wept and he snorted with anger, and on and on and on. And we're looking at 352 right now and going, man,
Yeah. Right.
we're just getting started. But
Exactly.
we're going to do a part two, probably next week sometime. So I'll let you guys know about that when that date is. Um, but as I think about that, the feelings wheel and labeling emotion, it makes me think about one of the things that I love to do is help people really dig into what are you really feeling,
Yeah.
because we have kind of surface emotions or things that we think it's okay to feel or it's socially acceptable or within our Christian culture or general culture. So often I get, well, I'm just really frustrated right now. I'm really
Right.
frustrated. And so, if the situation's right, it often is. You're not just feeling frustrated, but you've dumbed it down to make it acceptable.
Correct.
Because I'm not supposed to be mad. I'm not supposed to hold things against people. I'm not supposed to. But when we really get into it, and I say, "Wow, so you're really angry," and people look at me like a deer in the headlight. Like, what? No, no, I'm
Exactly. No,
frustrated.
not.
Okay, well, let's talk about it. And by the end,
Right.
they're like, "Oh, I am angry. Yeah, I am." And this is how my because the resentment, which is anger over time, that gets stuck. It just is
Yeah.
churning, 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 and we just keep stuffing it down and pushing it down. So part of the
Right.
beauty of pointing it out, getting that vocabulary, speaking it. What is it? It helps us understand then, and gets to the root of where we're stuck. And sometimes, and we can talk about it. There's a lot of good fruit
Mhm.
that comes out of it, like empathy, understanding what to do next. All kinds of different things that are, some people find, oh, I've been stuck here for years and
Mhm.
have never known that I've even been feeling that. And now I have a lot of
Right.
ungrieved or, unspent emotions to go after and to, like you said, integrate is a great word. So we work with our emotions instead of against them.
Right.
And they can help us live, freely.
Yeah, I know. Like, I think of two really quick stories. I remember asking a gal once, "Well, how does this make you feel?" We were talking about something at work, and she said, "Crappy." I go, "How does crappy feel?" And she said, "Crappy." I said, "Great. So, how does crappy really feel?" She goes, "I don't know."
Hmm.
I go, "Well, you just said it was crappy." And then we finally asked enough why questions where she got to, "Well, I'm just fearful." Okay, got it. Now we've named the emotion, right?
Which is
And
way
that
different
is
than
way different than
crappy.
crappy. Okay, I know what crappy looks like, but I don't know how crappy feels, right? And then, so that is, I think, just such a good piece of the learning, right? Or even just the nuances. And again, is this really worth it? Well, there's a huge difference between saying to you, Matt, I'm really angry, or I'm disappointed.
Hmm.
So what is it? Disappointment is expectation isn't met. Anger is something unjustly happened, and now I'm, somebody thwarted what I believe is right. And again, being able to talk about those in a beautiful way that's honest and clear is really helpful.
Yeah. And it honors the emotion that's trying to say, hey, something's going on here. I
Yeah,
need help.
right.
Yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
Another one is
Absolutely.
I'm stressed. We all,
Oh yeah,
I'm just so stressed. And honestly, that's not even really all that much of a helpful emotion.
not really.
We've
No.
kind of used that as a blanket of, something. But what is it? Is it fear? Is it anger? Is it sadness? Is it, you know, you feel pressure about something, or there's so much more behind it,
Oh yeah,
and yet
yeah.
we look for those quick, hey, this is what's going
Mhm.
on. I'm stressed. Oh, okay.
Right, which comes full circle. The good news about being in this time and culture is there's a science now. So it's all academically proven, it's all scientifically proven. And now they're going to produce more and more educational tools and information for us to go, I can grab onto that. I can learn something here. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's what's happening in a broader sense. And I know I'm a part of it, you're a part of it, and I want more and more people to be a part of bridging the gap, building that bridge between us and our emotions, the people that don't have the education or the understanding or the vocabulary and the tools. It is a terrifying feeling to be in emotion and not know what to do with it.
Yeah.
To feel emotions about emotions, right? To go, oh, I don't know what to do now that I feel angry or sad. And that's where a lot of us are in this pandemic time where, I feel these things and now what do I do? So to
Mm.
learn about it, to be open about it, to be vulnerable and say, I am feeling these things gives us space to not compound, the issues and that kind of thing. So
Right.
I think I'm excited. I know you described that at the beginning where we're in a time where that bridge is, or that gap is being bridged, and we want to be a part of that in our broader culture and the Christian culture and that kind of thing. So
Right.
um,
Absolutely.
as we wrap up here, I'm really excited for today, and we've got a lot more to talk about. More specifically, Mark's story of emotion in his life and mine, as well as kind of relating that to Jesus and how
Hmm.
he is the example of how to live emotionally healthy. So
Hmm.
I look forward to talking more about that stuff next time. So look for that. I'll send out an email to all of you um, to let you know when that's going to be, so you can join us then as well. Um, Again, look for the Choice to Show Up book and put that on the top of your reading list. And then check out my website, deeperministry.com. Contact me about coaching if you're interested in a story day. And you can subscribe to a weekly reading that I put out as well. So thank you all so much, and have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, man.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate it.